So former CIA analyst Tara Mahler. Unfortunately, I know both of you quite well because this stuff happens now. Malcolm, I want you then, Tara, to talk about the use of the weapon we have to get around our transportation vehicles as weapons of mass, not mass, but big destruction. Your thoughts?
Well, you know, people think that this is a relatively new tactic, and in fact it isn't. It's been used in Israel well over 50 times, and then over the last 2 years we've seen this spate of attacks from Nice in Germany at the Christmas market, London, 2 attacks which also culminated with, weapons attacks, and then, of course, the one that took place in Barcelona at La Rambla, which was very, very similar to the one that took place today. This is a devolution of ISIS and al-Qaeda's terrorism from 9/11 style, highly organized attacks, Paris style attacks, down to inspiring the individual to either grab a knife or get in their vehicle and just go out and carry out an individual act of terrorism.
Malcolm, you don't need a manual to get into a car and look for a bike path. I mean, that is the frightening aspect of this. 8 people dead now, many injured, because somebody simply had the will to do something. You can call it cowardly, which it is, but it simply requires the human soul to go that direction and say, I'm going to do this rather than drive a car down a street with nobody on it. I'm going to drive over people. And have the what do you call it, the intestinal evil to be able to keep driving after you've hit the first person. That requires some real evil. But your thoughts?
Well, you're absolutely right. It is evil. And what it is you are seeing the physical manifestation of a cult ideology. And what you're seeing is not Islam whatsoever. None of this is condoned, including the, sacrificing and getting yourself killed at the end of a terrorist attack. None of that is Islamic. It's anti-Islamic. And what you're seeing is these people have created a belief system in which mass murder, as we saw in 9/11 and as we've seen all throughout the Middle East, they kill more Muslims than anyone else, where mass murder is their act of worship. And that's just cultism. And there's virtually no way to stop it once it gets in the mind of one individual unless he enunciates it or communicates it electronically.
Well, we just have received a photo of the suspect. The U.S. government source tells us at NBC News that this photo is from Saipov's truck driver's license. Well, there he is, the suspect, picked up at the scene of the crime after being shot by police. Tara, I guess the question is, as always, motive, and perhaps we think because he said a prayer, Allah Akbar, that he has perhaps a terrorist intent, that it has something to do with his notion of his religion. But the idea of pulling out those 2 non-lethal weapons, to me, does suggest it fits the pattern of these people who are committing suicide in the act. They want to be shot.
Well, we don't know the specifics on this individual, on his particular motivation, but it does have the hallmarks of a ISIS-inspired like attack. Again, too early to say. We'll have more information in the next 24 to 48 hours. But look at what we do know. We do know that ISIS has been losing ground, and they've been calling for these types of attacks. We do know that when you look at their propaganda and you look at their messaging, they're calling on individuals to use vehicles to carry out attacks, to use low-grade, low-sophistication weaponry, things that don't require training, and they're willing to claim these individuals as one of their own. Right. That's a shift from previous terrorist tactics. And then we also know that you've seen basically the proliferation of their messaging on online platforms. I was just on the Hill today hearing about Russian interference on these platforms, but also extremist and terrorist content. So this is not surprising, unfortunately. This is the trend we've been seeing. They lose ground as they start spreading their message online around the globe, and as they start calling on disgruntled individuals who might have other problems as well, but to grasp onto their potential ideology. Again, we don't know the specifics of this case, but if it looks like a lot of the other cases we've seen that Malcolm mentioned previously, so I wouldn't be surprised to know that it was ISIS-inspired, perhaps with no direct links back to ISIS, but perhaps, something somewhere triggered this individual and he was exposed to content that may have radicalized him in some way, along with other factors that may have driven this. Again, too early to say, but it wouldn't surprise me given the information and the fact that the NYPD came out rather early to use the word terrorism, something that they don't always do right away if they're looking into potential other scenarios.
Well, Malcolm, early in our formal educations, we're taught sort of the notion of dramatic justice, that somehow for every great crime, there must be some great criminal mind. There must be Othello, you know, and it must be Iago who went after Othello. It must be Moriarty, Professor Moriarty goes after Sherlock Holmes, or the Cavendish gang to go after the Lone Ranger. We're taught it must be somebody equal to the horror. Is that your experience? Because we've been just through this Kennedy examination of that those documents, and I wonder whether we say cowardly act by a loner, a loser, a misfit, if that's not more the case.
You know, I think there are two dimensions to this. I've been in the house of Osama bin Laden in Jalalabad. You know, I've seen the power of how he corrupted Islam and gotten entire multiple generations to follow, you know, what he believed. ISIS is just the 5th generation of that corrupt ideology. But then when you get down to the street level, you have these former petty criminals, these guys who are really sort of losers in their own society. And even Christians, we've seen Catholics in Canada who converted to quote-unquote Islam and then carried out acts of... You see them do this, and what you really see is a person who either has a mental defect or who has, you know, some loss and vacuum in their